As soon as they had robbed any man, woman, or child, they used to carry off the carcass to the den. Cutting it into quarters, they would pickle the mangled limbs, and afterwards eat it. This being their only sustenance, and notwithstanding they were at least so numerous, they commonly had superfluity of this their abominable food, so that in the night time they frequently threw legs and arms of the unhappy wretches they had murdered into the sea, at a great distance from their bloody habitation. The limbs were often cast up by the tide in several parts of the country, to the astonishment and terror of all beholders, and others who heard of it. This is an excerpt from the 1843 John Nicholson book, Historical and Traditional Tales in Prose and Verse, connected with the south of Scotland. What Nicholson is describing is the legend of Sawney Bean. According to the legend, Sawney was the head of a family of cannibals. The story goes that King James VI sent a search party to capture Sawney and his family. They were then brutally executed for their heinous crimes. This story inspired Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes. Craven was struggling to find work as a director. His debut, The Last House on the Left, put him into a horror-shaped hole. There were projects he wanted to do, a Vietnam War drama among them, but he couldn't find any funding. Craven edited 2 films for a friend named Peter Locke, who was insistent that Craven should do another Last House. He resisted until he was out of money. What appealed to Craven about the Sawney Bean story was the retaliation the family received. The men were castrated and had their hands and feet cut off. They were forced to bleed to death. The women were burned at the stake. Craven was fascinated by this idea of violent retribution. In Last House, Mary's parents are driven to commit heinous acts of violence after being pushed to the limit. Craven explores the same idea in The Hills Have Eyes. A family goes to the desert in search of a silver mine they inherited. They then come across a family of cannibals who were mutated by the radiation of nuclear weapons testing. The cannibals start picking off the family until the family fights back. The film ends with the Doug character brutally stabbing one of the cannibals, named Mars, to death. There is no real closure or happy ending, even though one was shot. The film ends on this intense realization Doug has. He has become just as vicious as the villains. The Hills Have Eyes is everything Craven was trying to do with The Last House on the Left done better. It's intense and shocking without being nearly as gratuitous as Last House, and thematically it's dealing with a lot of the same ideas. Like with Last House, there's no catharsis to the violence. As I talked about in my Last House video, death means something in a Wes Craven movie. It's genuinely sad when someone dies here. The survivors have to deal with so much loss, and it weighs on them as well as the audience. Visually, the film is a massive step forward for Craven. A lot of that is thanks to the director of photography, Eric Saarinen, who captures some really beautiful shots. And the location is great. The barren desert is a terrific location for a horror film. What makes it even better are these rocks, which look almost skeletal. It's very creepy. Another important piece of this puzzle is the release of Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. That film was an obvious influence, being about a group of friends coming across a family of cannibals in the middle of nowhere. Like Last House, a lot of Texas Chainsaw's terror comes from its documentary-esque cinematography. It doesn't look like a glossy movie. It's dirty, gross, and unpleasant. That film's visual style has an effect on Hills Have Eyes to the point that Mary Church, who worked on Texas Chainsaw, brought some of the props from that movie to the Hills Have Eyes set. I think one of the film's strongest elements is that it predates certain horror tropes. While they were obviously tropes by this point, John Carpenter's Halloween solidified certain ones that have mostly stuck in the genre since. If you look at a horror film post-Halloween, 9 times out of 10, you can call which characters are going to live or die based purely on a cast photo. If Hills Have Eyes had been made in 1979 or 1980, Brenda would have been a brunette, and a poor attempt to recapture what made Laurie Strode such a great character. But this film lives outside of all that. When you watch it for the first time, there's no way you'll be able to guess which characters live or die. There's a real natural chemistry to everyone that works. There's a genuine suspense in every scene because I'm not watching tropes fill a role. I'm watching people. I wish the movie hadn't used the N-word, but that is something that character would absolutely say. And his ass does get blown the fuck up, so there is one cathartic death. Released in 1977, the film grossed around $25 million. The film's budget is a little unclear. Craven said it was about $325,000, so the film made a pretty decent profit. However, Craven believes its success was impeded by the release of Smokey and the Bandit 1 week after the release of the film. The film falls more into the cult classic category. The Hills Have Eyes is an excellent film. It effectively shocks without the more exploitation nature of Last House. Craven clearly learned how effective not showing the horror is. Less is more. It's thematically tighter without bizarre comic relief to confuse the tone. The movie is an example of what Craven could do at his best. And a dog kills a rapist cannibal. That's cinema. Hi, if you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. If you want to be notified about future videos, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.